Chapter 14. On the 31st of December, New Year's Eve, 1809-10, an old grandee of Catherine's day was giving a ball and midnight supper. The diplomatic corps and the emperor himself were to be present. The grandee's well-known mansion on the English quay glittered with innumerable lights. Police were stationed at the brightly lit entrance, which was carpeted with red baize, and not only gendarmes but dozens of police officers and even the police master himself stood at the porch. Carriages kept driving away and fresh ones arriving, with red-liveried footmen and footmen in plumed hats. From the carriages emerged men wearing uniforms, stars, and ribbons, while ladies in satin and ermine cautiously descended the carriage steps, which were let down for them with a clatter, and then walked hurriedly and noiselessly over the baize at the entrance. Almost every time a new carriage drove up, a whisper ran through the crowd and caps were doffed. The emperor? No, a minister, prince, ambassador. Don't you see the plumes? Was whispered among the crowd. One person, better dressed than the rest, seemed to know everyone and mentioned by name the greatest dignitaries of the day. A third of the visitors had already arrived, but the Rostovs, who were to be present, were still hurrying to get dressed. There had been many discussions and preparations for this ball in the Rostov family, many fears that the invitation would not arrive, that the dresses would not be ready, or that something would not be arranged as it should be. Maria Ignatievna Peronskaya, a thin and shallow maid of honor at the court of the Dowager Empress, who was a friend and relation of the Countess and piloted the provincial Rostovs in Petersburg high society, was to accompany them to the ball. They were to call for her at her house in the Taurida Gardens at 10 o'clock, but it was already 5 minutes to 10, and the girls were not yet dressed. Natasha was going to her first grand ball. She had got up at 8 that morning and had been in a fever of excitement and activity all day. All her powers since morning had been concentrated on ensuring that they all, she herself, Mama, and Sonia, should be as well dressed as possible. Sonia and her mother put themselves entirely in her hands. The Countess was to wear a claret-colored velvet dress, and the two girls white gauze over pink silk slips, with roses on their bodices and their hair dressed à la grecque. Everything essential had already been done: feet, hands, necks, and ears washed, perfumed, and powdered, as befits a ball. The openwork silk stockings and white satin shoes with ribbons were already on, the hairdressing was almost done. Sonia was finishing dressing and so was the Countess, but Natasha, who had bustled about helping them all, was behindhand. She was still sitting before a looking-glass with a dressing jacket thrown over her slender shoulders. Sonia stood ready dressed in the middle of the room and, pressing the head of a pin till it hurt her dainty finger, was fixing on a last ribbon that squeaked as the pin went through it. "That's not the way, that's not the way, Sonia," cried Natasha, turning her head and clutching with both hands at her hair, which the maid who was dressing it had not time to release. "That bow is not right. Come here." Sonia sat down and Natasha pinned the ribbon on differently. "Allow me, miss." "I can't do it like that," said the maid who was holding Natasha's hair. "Oh, dear. Well then, wait." "That's right, Sonia. Aren't you ready?" "It is nearly 10, came the Countess' voice. "Directly. Directly. And you, Mama?" "I have only my cap to pin on." "Don't do it without me," called Natasha. "You won't do it right." "But it's already 10. They had decided to be at the ball by 10:30, and Natasha had still to get dressed and they had to call at the Taurida Gardens. When her hair was done, Natasha, in her short petticoat from under which her dancing shoes showed, and in her mother's dressing jacket, ran up to Sonia, scrutinized her, and then ran to her mother. Turning her mother's head this way and that, she fastened on the cap and, hurriedly kissing her grey hair, ran back to the maids who were turning up the hem of her skirt. The cause of the delay was Natasha's skirt, which was too long. 2 maids were turning up the hem and hurriedly biting off the ends of thread. A third with pins in her mouth was running about between the Countess and Sonia, and a fourth held the whole of the gossamer garment up high on one uplifted hand. "Mavra, quicker, darling. Give me my thimble, miss, from there." "Whenever will you be ready?" asked the Count, coming to the door. "Here is some scent." Perenskaya must be tired of waiting. It's ready, miss, said the maid, holding up the shortened gauze dress with 2 fingers, and blowing and shaking something off it, as if by this to express a consciousness of the airiness and purity of what she held. Natasha began putting on the dress. In a minute. In a minute. Don't come in, Papa, she cried to her father as he opened the door, speaking from under the filmy skirt which still covered her whole face. Sonia slammed the door to. A minute later they let the Count in. He was wearing a blue swallowtail coat, shoes and stockings, and was perfumed and his hair pomaded. "Oh, Papa! How nice you look!" "Charming," cried Natasha, as she stood in the middle of the room smoothing out the folds of the gauze. "If you please, miss." "Allow me," said the maid, who on her knees was pulling the skirt straight and shifting the pins from one side of her mouth to the other with her tongue. "Say what you like," exclaimed Sonia, in a despairing voice as she looked at Natasha, "say what you like, it's still too long." Natasha stepped back to look at herself in the pier glass. The dress was too long. "Really, madam, it is not at all too long," said Mavra, crawling on her knees after her young lady. "Well, if it's too long we'll tack it up in 1 minute," said the resolute Dunyasha, taking a needle that was stuck on the front of her little shawl and, still kneeling on the floor, set to work once more. At that moment, with soft steps, the Countess came in shyly, in her cap and velvet gown. "Ooh oh oh, my beauty," exclaimed the Count, "she looks better than any of you." He would have embraced her but, blushing, she stepped aside fearing to be rumpled. "Mamma, your cap, more to this side," said Natasha. "I'll arrange it," and she rushed forward so that the maids who were tacking up her skirt could not move fast enough and a piece of gauze was torn off. "Oh goodness! What has happened? Really it was not my fault." "Never mind, I'll run it up, it won't show," said Dunyasha. "What a beauty, a very queen," said the nurse as she came to the door. "And Sonia. They are lovely." At 10:15 they at last got into their carriages and started. But they had still to call at the Taurida Gardens. Perenskaya was quite ready. In spite of her age and plainness she had gone through the same process as the Rostovs, but with less flurry, for to her it was a matter of routine. Her ugly old body was washed, perfumed, and powdered in just the same way. She had washed behind her ears just as carefully, and when she entered her drawing room in her yellow dress, wearing her badge as maid of honor, her old lady's maid was as full of rapturous admiration as the Rostov servants had been. She praised the Rostovs' toilets. They praised her taste and toilet, and at 11 o'clock, careful of their coiffures and dresses, they settled themselves in their carriages and drove off. Chapter 15. Natasha had not had a moment free since early morning and had not once had time to think of what lay before her. In the damp chill air and crowded closeness of the swaying carriage, she for the first time vividly imagined what was in store for her there at the ball, in those brightly lighted rooms, with music, flowers, dances, the emperor, and all the brilliant young people of Petersburg. The prospect was so splendid that she hardly believed it would come true, so out of keeping was it with the chill darkness and closeness of the carriage. She understood all that awaited her only when, after stepping over the red baize at the entrance, she entered the hall, took off her fur cloak, and, beside Sonia and in front of her mother, mounted the brightly illuminated stairs between the flowers. Only then did she remember how she must behave at a ball, and tried to assume the majestic air she considered indispensable for a girl on such an occasion. But, fortunately for her, she felt her eyes growing misty, she saw nothing clearly, her pulse beat 100 to the minute, and the blood throbbed at her heart. She could not assume that pose, which would have made her ridiculous, and she moved on almost fainting from excitement and trying with all her might to conceal it. And this was the very attitude that became her best. Before and behind them other visitors were entering, also talking in low tones and wearing ball dresses. The mirrors on the landing reflected ladies in white, pale blue, and pink dresses, with diamonds and pearls on their bare necks and arms. Natasha looked in the mirrors and could not distinguish her reflection from the others. All was blended into one brilliant procession. On entering the ballroom the regular hum of voices, footsteps, and greetings deafened Natasha, and the light and glitter dazzled her still more. The host and hostess, who had already been standing at the door for half an hour repeating the same words to the various arrivals, charmed de vouvoir, greeted the Rostovs and Perenskaya in the same manner. Delighted to see you. The two girls in their white dresses, each with a rose in her black hair, both curtsied in the same way, but the hostess' eye involuntarily rested longer on the slim Natasha. She looked at her and gave her alone a special smile in addition to her usual smile as hostess. Looking at her she may have recalled the golden, irrecoverable days of her own girlhood and her own first ball. The host also followed Natasha with his eyes and asked the count which was his daughter. Charming, said he, kissing the tips of his fingers. In the ballroom guests stood crowding at the entrance doors awaiting the emperor. The countess took up a position in one of the front rows of that crowd. Natasha heard and felt that several people were asking about her and looking at her. She realized that those noticing her liked her, and this observation helped to calm her. There are some like ourselves and some worse, she thought. Perenskaya was pointing out to the countess the most important people at the ball. That is the Dutch ambassador, do you see? That gray-haired man, she said, indicating an old man with a profusion of silver-gray curly hair, who was surrounded by ladies laughing at something he said. Ah, here she is, the Queen of Petersburg, Countess Bezzakova, said Perenskaya, indicating Helene who had just entered. How lovely! She is quite equal to Maria Antonovna. See how the men, young and old, pay court to her. Beautiful and clever, they say Prince, is quite mad about her. But see, those two, though not good-looking, are even more run after. She pointed to a lady who was crossing the room followed by a very plain daughter. She is a splendid match, a millionairess, said Perenskaya. And look, here come her suitors. That is Bezzakova's brother, Anatole Kuragin, she said, indicating a handsome officer of the horse guards who passed by them with head erect, looking at something over the heads of the ladies. He's handsome, isn't he? I hear they will marry him to that rich girl. But your cousin, Drobetskoy, is also very attentive to her. They say she has millions. Oh yes, that's the French ambassador himself, she replied to the countess' inquiry about Caulaincourt. Looks as if he were a king. All the same, the French are charming, very charming. No one more charming in society. Ah, here she is. Yes, she is still the most beautiful of them all, our Maria Antonovna. And how simply she is dressed. Lovely. And that stout one in spectacles is the universal Freemason, she went on, indicating Pierre. Put him beside his wife and he looks a regular buffoon. Pierre, swaying his stout body, advanced, making way through the crowd and nodding to right and left as casually and good-naturedly as if he were passing through a crowd at a fair. He pushed through, evidently looking for someone. Natasha looked joyfully at the familiar face of Pierre, the buffoon, as Perenskaya had called him, and knew he was looking for them, and for her in particular. He had promised to be at the ball and introduce partners to her. But before he reached them Pierre stopped beside a very handsome, dark man of middle height, and in a white uniform, who stood by a window talking to a tall man wearing stars and a ribbon. Natasha at once recognized the shorter and younger man in the white uniform. It was Bolkonsky, who seemed to her to have grown much younger, happier, and better looking. There's someone else we know, Bolkonsky, do you see, Mama, said Natasha, pointing out Prince Andrew. You remember, he stayed a night with us at Otradno. Oh, you know him, said Perenskaya. I can't bear him. Il fait à présent la pluie et le beau temps. He's too proud for anything. Takes after his father. And he's hand in glove with Speransky, writing some project or other. Just look how he treats the ladies. There's one talking to him and he has turned away, she said, pointing at him. I'd give it to him if he treated me as he does those ladies. He is all the rage just now. Chapter 16. Suddenly everybody stirred, began talking, and pressed forward and then back, and between the two rows, which separated, the emperor entered to the sounds of music that had immediately struck up. Behind him walked his host and hostess. He walked in rapidly, bowing to right and left as if anxious to get the first moments of the reception over. The band played the Polonaise in vogue at that time on account of the words that had been set to it, beginning, Alexander, Elisaveta, all our hearts you ravish quite. The emperor passed on to the drawing room, the crowd made a rush for the doors, and several persons with excited faces hurried there and back again. Then the crowd hastily retired from the drawing room door, at which the emperor reappeared talking to the hostess. A young man, looking distraught, pounced down on the ladies, asking them to move aside. Some ladies, with faces betraying complete forgetfulness of all the rules of decorum, pushed forward to the detriment of their toilets. The men began to choose partners and take their places for the Polonaise. Everyone moved back, and the emperor came smiling out of the drawing room leading his hostess by the hand but not keeping time to the music. The host followed with Maria Antonovna Narishkina, then came ambassadors, ministers, and various generals, whom Perenskaya diligently named. More than half the ladies already had partners and were taking up, or preparing to take up, their positions for the Polonaise. Natasha felt that she would be left with her mother and Sonia among a minority of women who crowded near the wall, not having been invited to dance. She stood with her slender arms hanging down, her scarcely defined bosom rising and falling regularly, and with bated breath and glittering, frightened eyes gazed straight before her, evidently prepared for the height of joy or misery. She was not concerned about the emperor or any of those great people whom Perenskaya was pointing out. She had but one thought: is it possible no one will ask me, that I shall not be among the first to dance? Is it possible that not one of all these men will notice me? They do not even seem to see me, or if they do they look as if they were saying, ah, she's not the one I'm after, so it's not worth looking at her. No, it's impossible, she thought. They must know how I long to dance, how splendidly I dance, and how they would enjoy dancing with me. The strains of the Polonaise, which had continued for a considerable time, had begun to sound like a sad reminiscence to Natasha's ears. She wanted to cry. Perenskaya had left them. The count was at the other end of the room. She and the countess and Sonia were standing by themselves as in the depths of a forest amid that crowd of strangers, with no one interested in them and not wanted by anyone. Prince Andrew with a lady passed by, evidently not recognizing them. The handsome Anatole was smilingly talking to a partner on his arm and looked at Natasha as one looks at a wall. Boris passed them twice and each time turned away. Berg and his wife, who were not dancing, came up to them. This family gathering seemed humiliating to Natasha, as if there were nowhere else for the family to talk but here at the ball. She did not listen to or look at Vera, who was telling her something about her own green dress. At last the emperor stopped beside his last partner. He had danced with three, and the music ceased. A worried aide-de-camp ran up to the Rostovs requesting them to stand farther back, though as it was they were already close to the wall, and from the gallery resounded the distinct, precise, enticingly rhythmical strains of a waltz. The emperor looked smilingly down the room. A minute passed but no one had yet begun dancing. An aide-de-camp, the master of ceremonies, went up to Countess Bezikova and asked her to dance. She smilingly raised her hand and laid it on his shoulder without looking at him. The aide-de-camp, an adept in his art, grasping his partner firmly round her waist, with confident deliberation started smoothly, gliding first round the edge of the circle, then at the corner of the room he caught Helene's left hand and turned her, the only sound audible, apart from the ever-quickening music, being the rhythmic click of the spurs on his rapid, agile feet, while at every third beat his partner's velvet dress spread out and seemed to flash as she whirled round. Natasha gazed at them and was ready to cry because it was not she who was dancing that first turn of the waltz. Prince Andrew, in the white uniform of a cavalry colonel, wearing stockings and dancing shoes, stood looking animated and bright in the front row of the circle not far from the Rostovs. Baron Furhoff was talking to him about the first sitting of the Council of State to be held next day. Prince Andrew, as one closely connected with Speransky and participating in the work of the Legislative Commission, could give reliable information about that sitting, concerning which various rumors were current. But not listening to what Furhoff was saying, He was gazing now at the sovereign and now at the men intending to dance who had not yet gathered courage to enter the circle. Prince Andrew was watching these men abashed by the emperor's presence, and the women who were breathlessly longing to be asked to dance. Pierre came up to him and caught him by the arm. "You always dance. I have a protégée, the young Rostova, here. Ask her," he said. "Where is she?" asked Bolkonsky. "Excuse me," he added, turning to the baron, "we will finish this conversation elsewhere, at a ball one must dance." He stepped forward in the direction Pierre indicated. The despairing, dejected expression of Natasha's face caught his eye. He recognized her, guessed her feelings, saw that it was her debut, remembered her conversation at the window, and with an expression of pleasure on his face approached Countess Rostova. "Allow me to introduce you to my daughter," said the countess, with heightened color. "I have the pleasure of being already acquainted, if the countess remembers me," said Prince Andrew with a low and courteous bow quite belying Peronskaya's remarks about his rudeness, and approaching Natasha he held out his arm to grasp her waist before he had completed his invitation. He asked her to waltz. That tremulous expression on Natasha's face, prepared either for despair or rapture, suddenly brightened into a happy, grateful, childlike smile. "I have long been waiting for you," that frightened happy little girl seemed to say by the smile that replaced the threatened tears, as she raised her hand to Prince Andrew's shoulder. They were the second couple to enter the circle. Prince Andrew was one of the best dancers of his day and Natasha danced exquisitely. Her little feet in their white satin dancing shoes did their work swiftly, lightly, and independently of herself, while her face beamed with ecstatic happiness. Her slender bare arms and neck were not beautiful, compared to Helene's her shoulders looked thin and her bosom undeveloped. But Helene seemed, as it were, hardened by a varnish left by the thousands of looks that had scanned her person, while Natasha was like a girl exposed for the first time, who would have felt very much ashamed had she not been assured that this was absolutely necessary. Prince Andrew liked dancing, and wishing to escape as quickly as possible from the political and clever talk which everyone addressed to him, wishing also to break up the circle of restraint he disliked, caused by the emperor's presence, he danced, and had chosen Natasha because Pierre pointed her out to him and because she was the first pretty girl who caught his eye. But scarcely had he embraced that slender supple figure and felt her stirring so close to him and smiling so near him than the wine of her charm rose to his head, and he felt himself revived and rejuvenated when after leaving her he stood breathing deeply and watching the other dancers.